Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about the number one DPS loss that a lot of Elemental Shamans aren't even aware of, overcapping. Now, admittedly, most Elemental Shamans already know the obvious one here. That's Maelstrom. You don't want to overcap it, you want to spend it before you hit the max, and that's been a part of the spec forever. But this season, Maelstrom is only part of that problem. Elemental can now overcap technically on 3 different things at the same time: Maelstrom, Tempest procs, and Stormkeeper charges. And the reason that's such a big deal now is because all 3 of those resources are all pretty strictly tied together, which means it's incredibly easy to accidentally waste value just by playing the spec the way you're used to playing it. This is where a lot of Elemental players are losing damage right now, not because they're necessarily ignoring or wasting resources, but because they're doing what the spec has trained them to do, which is send Maelstrom as soon as possible. And this season, it's not necessarily as simple as that anymore. And this all really kind of just comes down to how Tempest and Stormkeeper interact with each other. Tempest generates Stormkeeper, and that one interaction is what makes overcapping this season incredibly easy. Tempest currently can store up to 2 charges, and Stormkeeper caps at 4. But with the tier set, Stormkeeper now gives us 3 charges when you press it instead of 2, and every Tempest cast adds another one on top of that. So you can go from safe to capped almost instantly. And the problem with that is this completely changes how we want to think about spending Maelstrom, particularly in our opener. Normally, when you're getting high on Maelstrom, the correct play is to send a spender. That's what we've always done, and that's how we avoid overcapping and generating our damage. But now, sending that spender can generate a Tempest proc. And if you've already got a Tempest proc in the chamber, you're now forced to cast it. That Tempest then generates another Stormkeeper stack, and if you were already close to that cap by casting Stormkeeper, then you probably already wasted a cast. So what used to be the safe play of just spending Maelstrom to not overcap can now be what's causing you to overcap in other areas. But let's break down exactly what I mean by that. The most common place this shows up is right at the start of a boss pull when you cast Ascendance. Your opener is just like you're used to. You pre-cast Stormkeeper, which immediately gives you 3 Stormkeeper charges. Then you press Ascendance, and Ascendance gives you a Tempest proc and a large amount of Maelstrom from your Lava Burst charges. So naturally, you then cast Tempest, and that Tempest then generates another Stormkeeper charge. And immediately like that in your opener, you are sitting at 4 Stormkeeper stacks, which is the cap. Also, by this point in your opener, you probably already have a good-sized chunk of Maelstrom, so the natural reaction would be to send that into a spender. But sending that spender has the potential to generate another Tempest proc. And since you can't consume your Stormkeeper charges with a Lightning Bolt while you're holding a Tempest proc, you're forced to either cast Tempest first or a Chain Lightning, which doesn't feel good. So you then cast Tempest again, which would theoretically generate another Stormkeeper stack, except you're already sitting at 4. So that entire charge just gets deleted. And this all happens within the first couple of globals of a fight, inside your Ascendance window where every single cast is worth way more. So what was initially the correct play of spending Maelstrom actually causes you to waste one of the highest value resources in your entire kit. So this is generally what the rotation is going to look like when you're opening up to prevent overcapping on those charges. You're going to open up with a Stormkeeper, pop whatever trinkets you have, and then ascend and go straight into your Lava Burst and Master the Elements rotation in single target. So here we go. We're going to Stormkeeper, Ascend, Lava Burst, Tempest, Lava Burst, immediately follow up with a Stormkeeper charge. I got a proc, Lava Burst, Elemental Blast so I don't overcap on Maelstrom. Go back, I overcapped on Maelstrom because I got an Aftershock proc. I now have a Tempest proc, Stormkeeper charged back up. So even in that rotation where I didn't necessarily overcap on Stormkeeper or Tempest charges, I did overcap on Maelstrom because of an Aftershock proc I got. Ultimately, there's not much you can do to prevent that from occurring in your opener just because you're generating so much Maelstrom. And especially if you're trying to prevent overcapping on Stormkeeper or Tempest charges, it's really, really difficult to not do that, assuming you get an Aftershock proc. If you don't get an Aftershock proc, that's fine, easy peasy, you don't have to deal with it. But if you do get an Aftershock proc, you might overcap on Maelstrom. That's okay. Realistically speaking, just try not to overcap on your charges. The fix here during your opener, or really any burst window where you have a lot of momentum, is you need to temporarily shift your focus to Stormkeeper so you don't create an overcapping chain. The easiest way to think about this is exactly the way we play around Lava Burst. You never want to sit at 2 charges of Lava Burst because if you get a Lava Surge proc, then you're wasting a charge. So the goal is to always be sitting at 1 charge, send 1, and leave room for a proc. Stormkeeper works a very similar way to this. you never want to sit at 3 Stormkeeper charges because you're only 1 Tempest away from potentially overcapping. And once you're capped, an additional Tempest is just going to waste value. So instead of dumping Maelstrom immediately, you instead want to send 1 Stormkeeper charge first. That will drop you from 3 charges to 2 charges and give you some breathing room in case your next spender procs Tempest, which would then generate another Stormkeeper charge and put you back to the 3 charges you initially had. So in this scenario, your mindset shifts and becomes keeping Maelstrom as your main priority, but do your best to never be at 3 stacks of Stormkeeper charges. In your opener, you always send 1 first to create that room, and then you go back to your normal way of thinking with your Maelstrom spending at the forefront. That small adjustment is all it takes to prevent this entire overcapping chain and lets you safely take advantage of the extra procs instead of wasting them. And this might all sound like min-maxing mumbo jumbo, but the reason this does matter is because Elemental right now behaves kind of like a cliff. Everything feeds into itself, with Stormkeeper generating Maelstrom, Maelstrom spenders generating Tempest, Tempest generating Stormkeeper, and the cycle continues. So the moment one of those overcaps, you don't just lose that 1 resource, you're starting a chain reaction of overcapping. If Stormkeeper overcaps, you're losing the instant casts. If you're losing those instant casts, you're losing Maelstrom generation. Less Maelstrom means fewer spenders, and fewer spenders means fewer Tempest procs, and fewer Tempest procs means fewer Stormkeeper charges later. So 1 wasted stack at the start doesn't just cost you 1 lightning bolt like it might sound, it cascades into a big chunk of lost damage over your next several globals. And this technically gets even more convoluted when you factor in Aftershock, which is why I suggest being at 2 Stormkeeper charges instead of 3. Because during Ascendance, you're already generating Maelstrom extremely quickly, and if Aftershock refunds Maelstrom, which, let's be honest, it's probably going to do at least once in your opener, it pushes you even closer to that edge. So if you're sitting near the cap of everything, that refund just forces another spender, which then forces potentially another Tempest, which then overcaps on Stormkeeper yet again. And at that point, you're falling off of a cliff. So if before anything with your Maelstrom, you instead send 1 Stormkeeper early to create that space, you're flattening that curve and giving yourself enough room for potential Tempest procs, room for Aftershock refunds, and room for those Ascendance Maelstrom spikes. So instead of 1 proc causing a chain reaction of wasted value, everything starts to flow cleanly into your next cast without feeling like you don't know what you're supposed to be casting because everything's glowing all at once. We're not trying to remove the momentum from Elemental because you can't. The spec is always going to have those moments where everything just starts feeding into each other and get incredibly quickly picking up momentum. The best we can do is manage that momentum better. And that's really the goal in what I wanted to talk about here. Don't stop spending Maelstrom or change your priority, but recognize that during burst windows, especially in Ascendance openers, you can't treat Stormkeeper the same way we used to. Because once you let 1 resource overcap, everything after that starts losing value too. But once you clean that part up, the opener gets a lot smoother, your burst becomes a lot more controlled, and you stop bleeding damage from wasted Stormkeeper charges that you might not have even realized you were losing in the first place. So if you've been dealing with this, try it out next time you're hitting a boss, and just pay attention to whether you're creating room with Stormkeeper before you start dumping Maelstrom. But anyways, that's all I got for the video, so if this helped you out, make sure to like the video. It really does help the channel out a bunch, and if you want more Elemental or general WoW content, make sure to subscribe as well. I've also been streaming over on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, so if you want to just hang out, ask questions, or watch me raid or do keys, feel free to stop by. And finally, if you want to support the channel a bit more directly, I have linked a Patreon below where I offer coaching and additional content, along with a Discord where you can just talk about the spec, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. But yeah, that's all I got for this one, so thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next one.